Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, something that you would have heard me talking about repeatedly throughout these podcasts, and certainly if you've joined any of our training, you'll hear me going on constantly about it, is the importance of listening to the voices of children and young people. So today we really wanted to pick up on that theme, and I thought who better to come and talk to us about this than one of the most fabulous services around, whose sole aim really and purpose is about gaining the voice of children and young people. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Helen McInnes and Iain Gibson, who are from Route1 Advocacy. So Helen, Iain, thank you so much for joining me today. Would you be able to start off just introducing yourselves a little bit about in terms of what your role is?
Of course, yeah. Hello, Steve. So I am one of the Route1 coordinators. We're a very small team. There's only 7 field staff and a manager, and also a business admin post as well, which leads me nicely over to why Iain's here.
Yeah, so I'm Iain Gibson. I'm one of the volunteers who helps with Route1, doing 2 roles really. One is visiting, where I see a child every couple of weeks and build a long-term relationship with that child. And I also do advocacy, where I meet with children who are either going through child protection processes or at risk of going through child protection processes, to get their voice and to make sure that their hopes, their fears, the tangible things they want to happen are taken into account.
Perfect. Well, if it's okay, we'll explore those a little bit in just a moment about sort of what that actually means and the differences between them, if that's okay. But before we do, Helen, would you be able to kind of talk about what is Route1? If nobody's ever heard of Route1 Advocacy before.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we are part of Somerset Council. We are independent in a lot of ways. So we sit within the quality assurance team within children's social care, which helps us maintain that distance between the field staff who are out, social workers, family intervention service workers, and it gives us a sense of separation while being part of a bigger organisation. So we're part of Somerset Council, and we provide statutory functions around 2 things which are identified in the Children Act 1989, which is advocacy and independent visitors. So as Iain touched on, independent visitors, a lot of people would call them mentors, but we're not allowed to use that terminology because that's non-statutory. Independent visitors are trusted adult friends, essentially, for young people in care, children and young people in care. In Somerset, our baseline is if a young person says they would like that service, we will provide it for them. So because we're not commissioned, we're not limited to a certain number of independent visiting relationships we can hold. We aim for 100% coverage. The advocacy is for any child in receipt of a service from children's social care. So do you have a social worker or a family intervention service worker? If yes, and you want advocacy, we will again aim to provide that for you.
You talked about advocacy and you mentioned there about sort of independent visitors. What is advocacy? If people aren't familiar with that term.
Sure. Well, advocacy has lots and lots of different definitions, and I'm not going to go into them all now because it's not really relevant, because the one we use is wishes and feelings. So we use a wishes and feelings model of advocacy, which basically is saying to the child, what do you want to be different? What are your wishes? What do you want to see different in your life? So these are often meetings where the child's life is being discussed. So in order to make the right decisions for that child, it's really important we know what the child thinks and wants to happen. So do they want to stay at the same school? Do they want to stay at home? Do they want to be adopted? Do they want to be in residential? Do they want to be in foster care? Where do they feel safe? So it's those sort of wishes and how they feel about things. So yeah, I may now be a child who's looked after, and how do I feel about that? What's it like having to have a 30-minute taxi drive from my foster carer to my school? How does that feel? Does it feel lonely? Do I feel safer? So it sounds, I always say it's an incredibly simple process because we're just talking about wishes and feelings, but it's also incredibly nuanced and quite complex as well.
No, definitely. And again, if it's okay, it would be great to to pick that apart a bit about how do you actually do that? Because like you say, there's a lot of challenges there, aren't there? And how much of an impact does that have in terms of that sort of advocacy, like I say, that gaining those wishes of feelings? And obviously, we need to acknowledge that services are stretched and foster placements are often a few and far between and difficult to gain. So how much of an impact do you kind of see that having for the children and young people you work with?
I think it varies, but quite often the impact is massive. And I'm sure Iain will be able to pick up on this as well. But some of the things that our advocates hear from children are often things that they've not told anybody else. And there are a number of reasons for this. But I can think of one example where there was a child I saw for advocacy. And one of the key points she kept on making was it was a child on a child protection plan, was that she didn't feel safe at home, which is quite a key thing, I think. And during the planning, during the conference, it was a very complicated conference with split parents and lots of agencies involved. And so they were talking about service provision and when things were going to take place and how it was going to be done. But that really key point about the fact the child didn't feel safe at home just got kind of overlooked in the sort of melee of other things that were going on. So the child wasn't attending the meeting, so I was there as that child. So I had to say, just a little point here, but we haven't considered how we're going to help that child feel safe at home. And everybody kind of went, oh no, we haven't. And then that was then put in the plan. And at the next time I met that young person, that wasn't an issue anymore. They did feel safe at home because they had planning in place around that. So that's just one example.
The majority of advocacy that I'm involved with is with children that are still with the family. There are some that are with fosters and some that are in various care settings. And often the parents haven't really heard that voice of the child and what the child is wanting. And that can be all sorts of practical dimensions. So it can be about the food they want or the activities that they want to do, or it can be about the safety of the child. And one family I've met a few times, there were some real issues with elder siblings copying some of the behaviour that they've seen from the parents, and that then really disturbing the younger children. And that really hadn't been picked up through the other interactions that those children had had, and giving that a voice through the meetings and making sure in the meeting that actions were put in place to support that elder child in how they can modify their behaviour was really critical to the well-being of the younger siblings.
No, I can see that. I'm going to ask a daft question now. The question is, why is it important? And why is this such a crucial thing?
Because children are at the centre of everything we do. And that's a phrase that gets bandied around quite a lot. And I'm sure all agencies working with children do that. But they have different constraints that are put on them. So a school's primary concern is children, but it's the education of children, and they're within a framework. Social workers have to consider best interests. Other agencies have other things they need to consider. Within Route 1, all we have to consider is putting that child right in the centre. So we only do advocacy who children who want advocacy. We only talk to children who want to talk to us. They can change their minds at the last minute. And so we're giving them this space where essentially they're in charge. They're in charge of what they say, what they share, how they share it, and who we then share it with. And that vibe, if you like, for want of a better word, really provides an opportunity for things to be said and shared that often aren't shared in any other way. And sometimes these very tiny little bits of information are the things which can totally change the direction that plan's going in. For example, I saw a little girl a while back, probably over a year ago now, and right at the end of the meeting, she went to put her welly boots back on. And she'd spent a lot of time during our time together talking about her lovely Peppa Pig socks. And they were great. They were brand new. Very cool. So she was putting her wellies on, showing me her Peppa Pig socks for the last time. And then she pulled her sock down and showed me a big ouchie, as she called it, a great big blister on the back of her foot. And I went, oh, that looks sore, which, I think that's just normal reaction. It's not rocket science, what we do a lot of the time. And she said, yes, her school shoes had been rubbing. So I said, oh, crikey, you probably need some new school shoes. Yes. But when Mummy asked Nanny for the money, Nanny said no. And okay. And I said, oh, well, maybe we'll get some other way. And then we packed away. I made a note of this because it was something the young person had said. In the meeting, the child protection chair said to Mum, why did you have to ask your mum for money for school shoes? Surely that should be something you should cover. And it actually turned out that the mum and the dad of the children did not have their own bank accounts.
Right.
And all of their money, all of their benefits, all of their child allowance went into the grandparents' bank accounts. And the grandparents there were the gatekeepers to the money. And so if Nanny said no to money for school shoes, new school shoes did not appear. And that was a question that nobody had asked that family because they'd never thought to. And actually having access to their own money was the key thing that had a massive impact on the well-being and the safeguarding of the children within that family. So that's just one of the weird little things that sometimes comes out of advocacy that nobody else had thought to ask.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about professional curiosity quite a lot, but I think that's a really good example of that. And there's often that thing, well, we need more professional curiosity. But like you say, a lot of it is just picking up on those nuances and just having that question mark and, well, okay, let's just see what that means, or let's just ask that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I think is, our role is very different to a lot of the other people that are interacting with the children. We're not there to solve or judge. We are just there to listen and then to give voice to what we hear. And I think that sort of freedom that you get, I think the other thing that I find really useful as an advocate, I don't know a lot of the history of that child and that family. So I have to inquire, I have to find out to be able to make sense of it myself and then to be able to articulate that. And I think that just gives a different dynamic. And the child picks up on that, I think, because they know you're not trying to say, oh, that's because of this, or this is because of that, or this should happen, or that should happen. You are just listening 100% to them.
Mm-hmm.
The other dynamic, I think, why does it matter, is that these aren't one-off events. You end up seeing the same children, or I have 4 or 5 times in the sort of 18 months or so that I've been doing this. And you build that real relationship with that child and often see the real progress that happens when the right support is put into the family. And there's some of the children I've seen on the 4th, 5th visit, the difference in their confidence, their independence, their language has been, it makes you feel really good for the small part you played in that process.
I think that's a really good point, actually, Iain, that the fact that we're not there to fix. And I think children really pick up on that we're quite different from other professionals. And the difference that you can see, another advocate said to me that she'd been to see a family on a number of occasions and they were actually being stepped down from child protection because of the difference the family had managed to make with support. And the little girl ran up to her and said, I've got so much to tell you this time. And she's one night I crept downstairs and I listened to Mummy and Daddy. And they said, now remember what our daughter said in the meeting, we must make sure that we open the curtains so it doesn't feel gloomy in the house. And this little girl was so amazed that that piece of information had been shared and her parents had taken it really seriously and were having a conversation about it because it did make a difference to her. And so it matters because these things that the children say make a difference to their lives.
Oh, definitely. Can I just take us back for a moment? Because we talked about, right at the start of this, we talked about advocacy and we talked about independent visitors. Is there a difference between the two? What's the difference? What does that look like in practice or timescales or anything like that?
There is a difference. I mean, some of our volunteers, like Iain, do both roles. Some do one, and it really varies because the actual structure of the volunteering is quite different. An independent visitor is a long-term commitment. So we ask our independent visitors to see a child for at least 2 years. So not every day for 2 years. Obviously, that would be a bit extreme. But once a fortnight if the child is still in Somerset, or once a month if they're been placed out of county. And that might be 2 hours, 3 hours, might be a little bit less depending on the age and stage of the child. But it's a long-term, trusted adult friendship. And the idea is you meet up and you do stuff. And that can be absolutely anything. It could be going for a coffee, going to, McDonald's, other burger outlets are available. It could be going to the theatre, going to the cinema, going for a walk around the park, going for a dog walk, going swimming, really anything that children like to do. So the idea is you're opening sort of windows to new experiences. It's meant to be educational, cultural. And I always say in training that everything is educational and cultural if you're talking to each other. So it's really about that long-term, say, trusted adult friendship. The advocacy is slightly different in that you might see a child more than once, but you might actually only ever see them once. So we would ring up our bank of advocates and say, hi, we've got a piece of advocacy. Can you help us? It's for a child protection review on this date. Child needs to be seen at school. They're an 8-year-old boy at school in Bridgewater. And then our volunteer might go, no, I'm really sorry, I'm on holiday. And go, no problem, thanks ever so much. And then we ring somebody else. That volunteer, when we find someone to say yes, we would then send them the details. They'd go and make an appointment to see the child at school or at home or wherever the referral says they should be seen. They get their wishes and feelings, write them down, type them up into a report, which gets sent back to us. And then they attend the meeting either on behalf of the child or with the child. And then you might never see them again. Or as Iain said, you might see them for the review or for advocacy advice and assistance or something else. But it's a more short-term in and out sort of thing.
And just in terms of Route 1, how many, you mentioned volunteers, how many volunteers are there in total? Do you know? I'll put you on
I actually looked just before we came to do this recording. So according to our current system, we've got 123 active volunteers.
Wow.
We train about 6 times a year, and those training groups vary in size. So we've got training coming up later in January, which we're training 6 people. The training that Iain was part of, I think there were 14 in that group, and that was one of the bigger groups. So we're constantly looking for additional volunteers. And as I say, some of our volunteers are independent visitors, and they just get on and they do that. Some of them are just do advocacy, and that's fine. And others do both roles. And because your volunteering has to fit in with your life. One of the things we really pride ourselves on in Route 1 is volunteer retention. It's like the Hotel California, you can check out, but you're not allowed to leave. And we do try and keep our volunteers because they're a massive resource. Last year, Route 1 provided advocacy over 1,000 occasions for children and young people in Somerset. Now, with a staff team of 7, there's no way we could get anywhere near that. Which is why we need our volunteers and we protect them and we think they're amazing people. So our volunteer recruitment is absolutely crucial, and we do that, hopefully, Iain's going to be nodding when I say this, by providing good support. And we also have social events as well. So actually, Wednesday night this week, we had a post-Christmas Christmas party, brought our volunteers and the staff together, just had a bit of a laugh, bit of food. Because what Stella, my boss, will always say is when you join Route 1 as a volunteer, you're joining the team. We're not a team of 7. We're really a huge team. It's just we're the select few get paid.
I know from talking to yourself previously, Helen, and talking to other volunteers, it is very much you are part of this team and we're all working together. And it's amazing that people like yourself, Iain, dedicate your time without any charge to support children, which is fantastic. And I don't know whether children and young people are aware of that you're a volunteer, but I would presume actually that would have quite a big sway as well. Somebody saying, look, I care about this enough. I'm not here being paid. I care about this because I want to be here, because I want to get your voice.
You do mention you're a volunteer when you meet them. I think for a lot of children that probably doesn't resonate particularly. I think the key bit is that you're just there listening to them, understanding them and what they want. And you've not got any other angle into it. And I think that really helps then, as particularly if you've seen them multiple times. I had one boy that I saw first time would hardly tell me anything. And one of the things we do within the process is that we read back what we'd recorded down. And if they don't agree or they don't want it said, they can take anything they want out. And this lad, that time, virtually, I think I said, he had hello and goodbye pretty much as the report, because he took almost a second time I saw him, because he built that bit more trust in. Couldn't stop him talking, and he wanted all of it being said, and he wanted Mummy particularly to hear what he was saying. So, I think you're really being a volunteer, I think, doesn't particularly resonate with them, but I think being there just for them, not for the process, does resonate with them.
If it's okay, well, it would be great to sort of get into the detail about actually what that looks like for yourself, Iain, and the work that you do. Before we do it, and when we're sort of talking about the voice of the child, often we think about what children, young people actually just say to us. And it's kind of taken quite literal of, we need to get their voice. But we know that in terms of gaining voice of children, young people, it's much broader than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
But often we do tend to say, well, this is what they've said, or this is what they've told us. And sometimes professionals can really kind of struggle if they're not directly told something. And also in a way, it kind of puts we're putting responsibility onto children, young people that they have to be able to tell us things. And that's a real challenge sometimes. And particularly, I think professionals can struggle sometimes if a child isn't saying something, or if they're pre-verbal, or if they have disabilities that prevents them from talking. So what does kind of gaining the voice of the child look like for you guys?
One of the things we talk about in training is that the voice of the child doesn't have to be a voice. It can be anything. So we look a lot at drawings and pictures. We have resources. So when you train as an advocate, you get a rucksack full of goodies, which everyone's like, can I keep it? I'm like, of course you can. This is your toolkit. Go off and add to it. Use it. And it'll have things like an emotions wheel and different toys. And it has little cardboard cutouts of people shapes, felt tip pens, and all sorts of little bits and bobs. And every advocate develops their own techniques for using them. One of the young people I do advocacy with, done it several times, is a secondary school age young person who is an elected mute. So she can talk, but she prefers to communicate by not talking. So I thought very carefully about the first time I went to see her. And I didn't want to say, I know you don't talk, because she can talk. She just prefers to communicate. So I actually said, I know that you prefer to communicate in ways other than talking. So I've got some ideas, but if you've got other ideas, you can look in my bag and see what works for you. So we did most of it by drawing pictures. So I drew, one of the questions the social worker had given us was discuss the family dynamics, which I thought was a bit of a challenge, to be honest. So what I did was I drew the requisite number of stick people, and I like to make a big joke about the fact my drawings are rubbish, because they are, and it's funny, because children are like, ha ha ha, here's an adult who's rubbish at drawing, and it balances out some of that power differential, and we have a laugh, and it's just a bit more chill. So I drew 5 stick people, because there were 5 people I knew about in her family, and they all had little feet that stuck out. But I didn't draw faces on them. So we labelled them all. Well, she labelled them. And then I gave her the emotions wheel and I said, choose the right face for Daddy. And she chose an angry face. So I said, oh, that is the angry face. Is that right? And she nodded. So I was like, cool. So we drew the angry face in. And then I wrote the words, sometimes, always, never. And I said, when does Daddy's face look like that? So she had the choice of then saying, actually, no, never. I'd made a mistake. He's not really angry. But she didn't. She said always. So then I can just write down always. And we went through every member of the family with her then explaining to us, showing us what her view of the presentation of her family members was. We then went on to look at who she had the closest relationship with. So again, another piece of paper, another 5 little stick figures. And I said, sometimes if you've been really good at school, you get a star. We talk about people being star of the week. I said, who would you give the most stars to in your family? Does she put loads and loads of stars? She chose her favourite colour, which was red. Felt tip, drew loads and loads of stars next to Mummy. Fabulous. And I was like, who's going to get the next lot of stars? Ooh. Lid on the felt tip. Put the felt tip down. So I just recorded that. Child put the lid on the felt tip pen and put it to one side. So I was like, oh, okay, nobody else is going to get any stars. And she shook her head, looked down. And again, I recorded that. The child put her hands together and looked down, because behaviour is communication. So then I was racking my brains. I was like, oh, I haven't thought about what I was going to do next. And then I said, when it rains, sometimes people feel a bit cross and grumpy. So is there anybody in your family that you would give raindrops to? And she looked up and she got a blue pen and put raindrops on some of the people. And then we went on to do more stuff about that. And actually, we came to a position where she made quite a big disclosure about one of her family members who did mean things to her.
It's amazing, isn't it? I think often people say, oh, this young person, they don't talk to us about things, or they don't want to talk to us about things. But I think in my experience, far and above, what it is that the child or young person doesn't know how to verbalize it.
Absolutely.
These are very complex emotions, complex situations that are going on. So just to kind of verbalize that is really tricky. It's tricky as adults. And you
Absolutely.
expect children, young people just to tell us this stuff. And it's very personal stuff a lot of the time. And I always think it's amazing when you give the right opportunity to be able to express something in that way. Actually, they're very forthcoming if you can find that right way. And I used to do a lot of direct work with young people. And sometimes you find that spark and the penny drops and you go, wow, okay, right. I know exactly what you're saying here, communicating to me. And that's different for everybody. But like you say, often we put that pressure on of how do I have this conversation? How do I say these things? But I know just little things sometimes. I used to, quite often when I used to first start working with young people, we just get an Argos catalogue or comic and stuff like that. And so let's do a college about ourselves. What we like, what we don't like, cut stuff out, stick it down, whatever. Again, it's amazing what comes out from things like that. Or you talked about relationships. Well, draw circles. Who's close to you in the circle? Who's furthest away? Or let's think about the dynamics of the house. Well, let's draw out the floor plan of the house. Or where's your space? Or where's mum's space? Where's dad's space? And just where's conflict? Where do arguments take place? Where do you feel safe? All of this kind of stuff can really suddenly pull something out.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to do with some A4 paper and a pack of felt tips. And the things like, the use of colour, I'll always say, I don't mind which colour you do this in. You can use pencil, you can use a pen, you can use a felt tip. What's your favourite colour? And then they say, green or red, whatever it is. And you go, well, who would you colour that person in? Who's, if you're going to colour somebody in your family in your favourite colour, who would it be? And then you can go, oh, that's interesting. Why is that?
Well, one thing I would say is that the key is to get them talking in the early part of the process. And so one of the sheets we have as we go to meet the children is a little bit about us, because they're going to be asking them lots of questions. And you can use that. I have the curse of my life of supporting Fulham, for example. And often with boys, more particularly, to be sexist and stereotypical, you then can get into a conversation about football teams as you do with girls. But you can talk about things that you like and don't like, and you ask them really non-contentious stuff just to get the dialogue and discussion going. If you dove in the first second with, what do you think about mummy or daddy, then the heckles are going to be up. They don't know you. You can add some humour into it. You're not a teacher, so you're not, controlling their behaviour in the same way. Often if they're getting a bit sort of active in the room, you'll go, hang on, you'll get me in trouble. And that seems to calm them down, because you're not an authority figure in the same way as the other people that they're interacting with. So building that dialogue, that relationship is really key before you then start getting into the questions that maybe the social worker wants answering, or the things that you want to get into with the family dynamics or the home dynamic. And I think, as Helen says, every 123 of the volunteers will have a different personality, and they'll have a different way of doing that. And it is sort of doing something that works for you and resonates for you. You have to be genuine. I think it's really important to be you and to be genuine.
A lot of advocacy is done in schools where the children attend school because it's easier. They're open, they have other people around, they have spare rooms, all of this sort of thing. But if a child's not attending school, or a child wants to be seen at home, we do send advocates to home. And I've certainly done a piece of advocacy in a home where a child was living with mum. And the first barrier was me getting mum on side, because what she thought I was a social worker doing an assessment. And so I had my Route1 backpack with all my stuff in, and I've got a folder, and I've purposefully chosen a slightly scruffy looking folder so I don't look too professional. And she looked at me and she could see me getting this folder out, and she went, what's in there? I said, have a look. So I gave it to her. And actually what's in my folder is cut out cardboard shapes of people and paper and pens and things like that. And I said, I can even show you the questions I'm going to be asking if you like. And she was like, yeah, okay. So I showed them to her. I said, And if there's any you don't want me to ask, or if there's any that your child doesn't want to answer, that's fine. We might just talk about something totally different. I said, all I'm here to do is to see what your son thinks about the situation and if anything he wants to change.
You mentioned earlier, Helen, that it's when the child wants the advocacy. But the parent, my understanding is the parent has also always agreed, or the legal guardian has agreed to that going ahead. So when I've not had, anyone sort of being antagonistic or, scared and worried and concerned. Yes, I get that. But generally, they want you to get the voice of that child to support it.
Yeah.
The other thing on the voice of the child, I think that's quite important, is what they don't say is probably as important as what they do say. So if you know there's a particularly fractious relationship and the social workers will know far more about that than you do, and they say everything's fine, then, that's saying something. I've met one set of boys, I think 4 or 5 times now, twin brothers. And the first time, it was very clear they'd been told by dad to say everything was fine and everything was wonderful. But gradually, that said a lot in itself to the meeting, was very important to the meeting on that occasion. But as I met them the future times, they were much more open about what was going well and what wasn't. And I think we are equally there, very importantly there, to feed back to the parents and to the other people involved, but to emphasize the positives in terms of, what the parents are doing well, or what the support is doing and what's happening, and what they really like about the food that one of the guardians cooks for them, or whatever, the things they enjoy doing with people. That's really, really important. It's not in the context of all this distress that the family are going through, that the positives are getting recognised and fed back.
I think that's such an important point, Iain. Thank you for saying that. And I love it in a conference when you read a child's views and you get a laugh, or you get the parents going, oh God, he would have said that, wouldn't he? Or because they hear that their children through what you're saying. And it can really remind people of why we're there. We're not there to have a pop at parents. We're not there to tell them they're rubbish. We're there because their child needs some support, and they might need some support to provide that. And just bringing that, the naivety at times of the children into the room. And I don't mean that because they're young children, because we will do advocacy from anybody. I think 4 years old is about our lower limit, but right up to 18 and 18 plus in certain circumstances. But, I think when I look back at myself at a 16, 17-year-old, I felt very grown up, but there was still a lovely naivety about me. And you do get that from the young people, where their views are so clear and so obvious to, and they're like, oh, why doesn't everybody get this? And to bring that into the room, I think, is really important. One of the questions we often get asked at training is, what do you do if a young person swears? Because when they're cross or they feel hard done by or whatever it is, they may well use some, fruity language. And my advice is always, you write it down exactly as it's said. So if they say my social worker is a C word, that's what you write down. And you don't react. You just go, okay, and write it down. Because sometimes that is absolutely indicative of how they're feeling about that person at that point. Sometimes they're saying it because they want to see how you react. And if you go, you can't say that about your social worker's a jolly nice person, that tells them something about where you're coming from. So we just write it down. And then you might say something, a follow-up question like, what does he do that makes you feel like that? And that's sometimes when they'll go, oh, actually, maybe he's not that bad. Or they might say, well, actually, it's because my dad says he's going to take us into care. And you go, okay, write that down. But you just get more information. But, again, language is really important and it is nuanced. And actually, if you feel like that, that is what needs to be represented. Would we read that out in conference? Absolutely. We would give a little bit of a health warning beforehand, and I would say the young person has used some terms and words in this report that some of you might find difficult to hear, but I checked with them and that's how they're feeling, so I'm going to read it out verbatim.
One of the last questions that I asked them, when you go through, you do record what they say, you then run through it with them, you adjust it, and you go, well, is there anything else you want to say to the meeting? And by then, you've normally built a good relationship up. And they can say some really wonderful things that they want to say, that, I'm going to be a princess, or whatever the hell it is. And quite often they go, you will say that at the meeting, won't you? You will make sure that that's said. And you go, yeah, you've told me to say it. Of course I'm going to say it.
Yeah,
Whatever it is.
We do say some odd things, don't we, Ian? I think we're the people who say the weirdest things in child protection conferences looked up to reviews.
But it's interesting because often we kind of shy away from actually using children's voices. Even if we've gained those, I remember years ago, somebody that I was line managing, she'd done loads of work with this young person, getting their voice, and put a lot of time into her assessment. And then as her line manager, I kind of went over it and I knew the work she'd done. So I'd done some observations during it as well. And I read the assessment and I said, look, I'll be honest with you, this is a great assessment, but that is not that child's voice. You know, you've put that into your language, into your voice. And I can't see, having seen the observation, the work you did, I can't see this child in here, despite all the work you've done. And I know you've written up loads of things, what have you. Take it away and put exactly what they said in here. Put it in their voice. What they wrote down, hop it in here. And she did then came back and I just said, this is probably one of the best assessments I've ever read. And but the difference it makes, but like I say, quite often we shy away from it. We think we've got to interpret it in a certain way or put it into an adult's voice. But then that's not their voice anymore. We lose that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, after one of the first advocacies I'd done, and Helen has the great joy of looking after me. But I phoned Helen and said, look, the child said this, the child said that. She said, well, put it in your report, put it in speech marks, so it's clearly their voice, because actually those words are really important. And you get those few phrases when you're doing an advocacy, you go, no, what you've said there is really critical. You say, hang on, let me just write down exactly what you've said there, because, it's really important that that's what's said to the parents, to the carers, to the people in the meeting. So I think not being as scared of that is really important. And the other side of it as well, I asked one lad who I'd got to know quite well about if there been any other instance like that. And he just said, I don't want to talk about that. And you just go, fine. Because my job's not to interrogate you. My job's to listen to you and to share it.
Okay, thanks. I mean, we talked about obviously sort of doing sort of drawings with children and young people. We talked about talking to them directly. But and you mentioned about observations as well. How does that work in terms of getting a child's voice through observation? Because obviously when we're observing, it's our interpretation of that. Does that make sense? How does that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be. And what we say to our volunteers is to try and just be entirely factual. So rather than saying the child looked very upset, you might say the child had some tears in their eyes. Or, the young person I was talking about earlier who prefers not to talk, to communicate, I will often say things like, she became very still and looked at her feet. Or she didn't make eye contact with me when we had been making eye contact before. So they are factual observations rather than any interpretation of what they might mean.
Or sometimes the clothing that some of the children are wearing is either dirty or has holes in it, or something like that, and you would record down to say that was the case. Or one I did in a home where the home was fairly disorganized, and again you would just say, went into the home, saw this, observed that, saw that. So you're not judging, you're not there to explain or solve, you're there to just observe, write down and report what you see.
I think the other question that I've got around this, which must be quite a challenging one, is that if you're talking to a child or young person and suddenly something comes out and you go, right, hang on, this is more than me just now having to listen and report back. And particularly if you suddenly become aware of a serious safeguarding concern, or if the child discloses something, how is that managed in the situation and the bigger picture as well?
One of the things we do when we meet with the child, when we start going through, we go through the confidentiality statement with them in terms of this is for this meeting, for this process. But we always say that unless you tell me something that makes me worried about your safety or somebody else's safety, and then I will have to tell somebody. And you make sure that you go through that with them. And quite often, if somebody raises something, I had a child tell me the other day about how there'd been conflict, physical violence between a dad and a mum. I said, well, I will have to report that. I'll have to let them know. You don't always tell them that. Depends on how the discussion's going. And we had a separate sort of box on our forms that we used to record safeguarding. And we would also put it in a covering email if it was something that was immediate concern, of course, I would then phone through to Helen or one of the other staff there, or the cover people, to make sure that was immediately reported.
Do you find that happens often?
I would say that probably 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of the meetings that you have some safeguarding issue. Not normally something immediate, normally something that they told you this happened last week or this happened a few days ago, that you go, hang on, that is something more than can just wait to be discussed in a meeting.
Yeah, and that kind of chimes in with what we see when we're on duty, when we're receiving views in. The safeguarding training, we do the Somerset Safeguarding Children's Partnership Cascade Pack as part of the training with our volunteers, which gives them a really good sense of what is a safeguarding concern, because obviously you can't report a safeguarding concern if you don't know what one looks and feels like within Somerset. Sometimes people report things as safeguarding concerns that are already known to children's social care, and that's fine, because we'd always rather people over-report than under-report. Occasionally, our advocates get information that nobody knew before, and that is happening semi-regularly. Occasionally, that will go to them needing to go to court. So we've got a case at the moment where an advocate took a disclosure from a young person about sexual abuse. That has led to one of the adults being taken to court, and they've actually had to provide an evidence statement, which we would support with. Occasionally, there'll be information where it changes the total course of the plan. So we've had information where an advocate's seen a child for initial child protection review, and then because of the information the child has disclosed, that meeting is then scrapped because the new information has led to other things having to take place. So it doesn't happen all the time, but hopefully all of our advocates feel really well versed in how to deal with it. And essentially we take it off the volunteers, and as a staff team and within children's social care, we manage that.
I'm moving on to that, Iain. Obviously, as we mentioned, you're one of the wonderful volunteers with Route1. How long have you been doing this for, and what sort of made you decide this is something you wanted to get involved in? Have you got a background of social work and that sort of thing?
Definitely not. No. Other than working in business for many years, and you end up becoming a amateur social worker or psychologist or whatever else you want to be as a result of working with huge variety of people we have. My own child had a number of issues, both development issues in terms of dyspraxia and stuff that he was dealing with, and also physical issues where he'd had some very major spinal surgeries in his case. He sadly had about 4 operations. And I was very conscious through both of those experiences for him that he was lucky to have myself and my wife, who were quite articulate, determined, to make sure he got the best that we could get for him in terms of happening. And I was also conscious that other children maybe didn't have that. So when I retired, I was actually listening, I think in bed one morning, to Radio Somerset, my wife's choice of station, not mine. And I don't know if it was you, Helen, or somebody was being interviewed on there about Route1 and talking about what they did. And I thought, well, this could be really interesting. This is a chance to do up for other children what I was able to do for my own son, and also a chance to keep that part of my brain and the skill set that I got with interviewing people and mentoring and coaching people, to use that now I was retired, because there's only so much gardening you can do. It was that sort of opportunity to give back and to utilize the skills that I developed that made me go online, see the application form, fill it in. I think there was a training course in 2 days' time. I think Rachel came to see me the next morning or that next afternoon, and then I was sort of in the, before I knew it, I was in the training course. It was something that I wanted to do, and I went along to the training, knowing I'd learn a lot, because hadn't learned about child development in any structured way. I hadn't understood a lot of the issues around attachments and other things that we were exposed to through the training. And it was a really lovely, diverse group of people. It was, there are a lot of people who are in retirement. There are people that weren't. I think there was a young lady on there that was in her 20s. There was at the time, so working in a pub in Taunton. There was a really lovely, diverse group of people there with very different experience. That was fascinating, learning from them and their life experience, as well as some more formal training. Not that Helen's particularly formal training that we got from the group, which was excellent. I think the key is it's always about what you want to do. You're a volunteer, so you do what you want to do, and if you don't want to do it anymore, you don't do it anymore. And if you can't do that week or you can't see that person, I've never once felt under pressure to do anything that I didn't want to do in terms of seeing children and getting involved in cases. Meeting with the child can be 30 to 45 minutes normally. Beyond 45 minutes, they lose their attention. So the meetings can be that long. I'll do about 3 a month. I think each one takes about 8 hours in total by the time you properly prepare questions, done the meeting, written it out. But that's very much down to me. That's my choice. And that's what works for me. And somebody else might want to do more, they might want to do less, but it's very much self-driven.
I imagine it must be quite challenging sometimes. And we talked about needing to build that relationship, that trust against potentially a series of barriers of being told, don't talk to this person because they want to take you away and all this sort of thing. And that can be quite daunting for people sometimes, and thinking, well, I haven't got that background, I haven't got that skill set. If anyone's thinking, oh, do you know what, it's something I'll be interested in, but I'm not sure I couldn't do that. You need to be somebody quite specialist to do that. You mentioned sort of training and support. What does that look like for you?
I think that the training sort of fundamentally in sort of two parts, if you want. One is the sort of the understanding, the education that you go through. But particularly when you get more into the advocacy side, there's a lot more about the sort of practical role modeling, going through this, listening to the voices of other people that have done this. So you're building up not just knowledge, but skill, if you want. Of course, the first time you do anything is slightly scary and worrying, and you're so worried you're going to get it wrong. And poor Helen, the sort of first few times, either with the visiting or the advocacy, she'd be waiting for the call afterwards. We'd be going through it. I said this, I did that. Did I do this right? Could I have done that better? But you build up your own style and approach in doing it. And for the people that I was on the course with, I'm sure, and we'd all have our very unique way of approaching that and working through it, but from that common understanding. But that support is always there. And even now, you occasionally, as I'm sure social workers and other professionals do, you go into a situation that triggers something in you, and then you've got a whole team. I've got Helen there. I've got Stella, our manager. There's other people in the team that you can phone and talk to about that and process it through. And that's really important. Knowing that backup is there. So when you come across something that triggers something from your own childhood or however it affects you, there is that support there is really critical.
And we're very, very hot on that, because as people who work within children's social care, you learn strategies for dealing with it. And I won't say that we become numb to it at all, because I think the day that happens is when you need to go. All of us still get affected by things, but that's our choice. It's our job. But for our volunteers, we never want one of our volunteers to have the weekend or an evening or be sleeping on something and be worried. So there's always somebody available. And during the training, we make sure that all volunteers meet all of the staff. And as Iain says, he knows that if he can't get hold of me, he's got contact numbers for everybody else and knows who they are. So it's not just ringing a faceless group of people. He knows what Dave's like. He knows what Kev's like. He knows what Becca's like. So again, it comes down to that teamwork, and we work through these things.
For yourself, Iain, if anybody's sort of listening to this and thinking, oh, do you know what, actually, I could be interested in that. What advice would you have for anyone sort of interested in becoming a volunteer?
I think it's an incredibly rewarding role to do. I think it is challenging, and that's part of the reward, because actually it's about how do I hook into that child? How do I build that relationship with that child? So the intellectual challenge of doing that, is good for me. I need things like that. I think it's very much you feel part of a community, and there's the social events which are important. You meet other people that are similarly minded and wanting to do the right things for children. There's training events that we go on where you volunteer. You choose to go on them, but they help you build a sense of community and understanding from other people. There is nothing better than when you see a child in a difficult situation and then you see them again 18 months later and they're in a much better place. I don't know what is a better feeling than that. I don't know if there is one. So it's a great feeling. The only thing I think you have to be concerned about is that people start thinking you're some sort of saint for doing it. Because, you tell people, oh, yeah, well, what do you do now you're retired? Oh, I do this volunteering with Route1. I work with children in care and whatever. And people immediately think you're something probably better than you are. But but that's no bad thing. It's good for your self-worth. And one of the things that, one of the neighbours around the road on a village walk was talking about it, and she is now volunteered. And she is now an independent visitor with a young girl that she's building that relationship with. And I think so by talking about it and inspiring other people, they can do it. And they then get all those dynamics of challenge, of self-worth, of growth, of giving back and investing back in your community. I'm very glad that I was in bed that day when it came on Radio Somerset.
Helen, I was going to ask you if you had anything to sort of say to support volunteers, but I'm not sure you need to be honest.
I know he's a very, very good advocate, both for children and for Route1. One of the questions I get asked a lot is when we talk about advertising, they go, how do you target your advertising? And the honest answer is we can't, because Route1 volunteers aren't a particular demographic. So they're not a certain age or a certain social class or a certain set of experiences. I've actually trained social workers, head teachers, class teachers, people who run factories, scaffolders, bar staff, people who are not employed, people with a history of their own, people who've been involved with children's social care as children. People who've been involved with the police in their history. So none of these things are barriers. The uniting factor of all of our volunteers are those things that Iain said. They look at the advert and they go, I'd like to give back. I'd like to make the world a little bit better. I'd like to make one person's day a little bit better today. Let's ignore the big picture. We're not fixing. We're just going along and having a bit of fun. And they're people who are fun. There was one young person Iain saw, and at the end of the meeting, she gave him a little card. So it was for advocacy. So she was getting this young person's wishes and feelings for a child protection review. And at the end of the meeting, she gave Iain a little card that said, "Thank you, Mr. Gibson. That was fun." That's just amazing, isn't it? Because not only did she get her voice heard, but she had half an hour, 40 minutes of just doing some colouring and having a chat with a nice man. So that's what unites our volunteers, is they're lovely, decent people who are interested in making the world a slightly better place. And that sounds horribly idealistic, but I'm going to stand by that one.
And on that note, if anyone wants to find out more, anybody's interested in becoming a volunteer or just find out more about the work of Route1 Advocacy in any way, where's the best place for them to find out?
Oh, there's lots of places. So we have a website. You can access that going to www.route1advocacy.co.uk. That takes you straight into our website, and there's information about the roles, and there's a link to the application form. We have 2 social media channels. We use Facebook and Instagram. You can give us a call. We have an office number, which is one of these strange computer telephone numbers. So it just goes to whoever's on duty that day. So it sounds a bit weird when you ring it up, but you will get through to a person. It's 01749 822 801. Try and find us. We are really happy to come and just chat to you. You don't have to fill in an application form. If you just want to ring up and have a chat or email one of us and have a chat, that's absolutely fine. We'll also come out to social groups. So you think, actually, I'm not interested. I haven't got time to volunteer, but I'm part of, a knitting circle or a badminton club. And we are visiting speakers. We'll come along and do that. We do all sorts of things. We're a little bit shameless because we're all very passionate about what we do. And hopefully that passion has come across. And the passion is the fact we put the child at the centre of all of our work without any strings attached.
Perfect. Well, listen, both of you, thank you so much for coming in to chat about the work you do, but also about the importance of the voice of children and young people. And it is, like I say, so crucial in everything we do and should be absolutely central in everything we do. It's been great to hear from you, and thanks for joining me. And I'll post the links that you talked about there, Helen, to your social media, your website in the description for today. So thank you very much. Great to see you both again, and hopefully we'll catch up again shortly.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
As always, if If you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode or are affected by any of the content discussed, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in this episode description. Likewise, if you've been inspired by listening to this and keen to find out more about volunteering for Route1 Advocacy, you'll find links for this as well. If you enjoyed listening to the ThePPod, we'd really appreciate it if you took that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave a review to let other people know about it, and make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode or would like to be involved in future episodes, we would love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guests today, Helen McInnes and Iain Gibson from Route1 Advocacy. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.